It was a moment no one in the palace corridors could have prepared for King Charles, his hands trembling, summoning Catherine into a private study. On the desk lay a single envelope, worn with age, marked in unmistakable handwriting. Diana. The late princess's name seemed to almost hum in the air, a silent presence filling the room with something heavier than memory. Catherine's steps slowed as she crossed the threshold, unsure why Charles had called for her at such an unusual hour. The palace, usually bustling with staff and the faint echoes of routine, felt strangely hushed, as though even the walls knew something profound was about to happen. She had been in this room many times before: polite conversations, private family discussions, moments of quiet reflection with the king. But today felt different. There was no warmth in Charles's expression, only a kind of solemnity that made Catherine's pulse quicken. His request for complete privacy had been almost unnerving. No aides, no advisors, not even William was allowed inside. The weight of that decision pressed on her before she even reached the desk. The envelope itself was unlike anything she had ever seen in the palace archives. The paper was slightly yellowed, edges soft and worn, carrying the scent of years gone by. Across its front, in sweeping, unmistakable cursive, was her late mother-in-law's name. Catherine's breath caught. This wasn't an old photograph, or a simple keepsake. This was Diana's handwriting, sealed, untouched, and held by Charles all these years. The seal itself, though aged, was still intact, the wax slightly cracked, but not broken. It was the kind of detail that told her the contents had remained hidden, untouched by anyone, since the day it was written. She looked up at Charles, searching for some explanation, but his eyes gave away nothing. There was only a long, almost painful pause before he spoke. His voice, though low, carried a tremor not from age, but from something deeper. "She wanted you to have this," he said, the words almost reluctant, as if releasing the letter was both a burden and a relief. Catherine's fingers hovered over it, her mind racing. Why her? Why now? What could possibly be inside that Charles hadn't entrusted to William, or to the family years earlier? The king's gaze didn't leave her, but his silence was deafening. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the surface of the envelope, and in that moment, it felt as if she had touched something alive, a fragment of Diana herself, preserved across time. The air seemed heavier, charged with the unspoken history between the late princess and the family she left behind. There was an instinctive pull to open it immediately, to let the truth spill into the room and end the unbearable anticipation. Yet, at the same time, she hesitated, almost fearing that whatever was written inside would change something fundamental, something that could not be undone. Charles stepped back slightly, almost as though he were giving her space, not just to open the letter, but to face whatever truth Diana had left behind. Her eyes dropped to the name again. Diana. The woman she had never met, yet whose presence lingered in every corner of royal life. The woman whose shadow she had walked in since the day she entered this family. And now, in the palm of her hands, was a message written by that very woman, one that had been waiting for years to find her. But what was inside this envelope was not a simple note. It was a ticking emotional time bomb, carrying truths Diana never dared to speak in public until now. The letter didn't begin with pleasantries, it began with a warning. Diana's words leapt from the page with a sharpness that seemed almost alive, as though she had known they would be read at a time when the stakes would be higher than anyone could imagine. "If you are reading this, then the moment I feared has already begun." Catherine's eyes moved slowly over the opening lines, her chest tightening with every word. This wasn't a sentimental message from a mother-in-law she had never met. It was a set of instructions, veiled in a tone of urgency that cut through the years as if no time had passed at all. Diana wrote as though she had been able to see beyond her own lifetime, mapping out the dangerous tides that would one day threaten the monarchy from within. There was no mention of the public, the media, or political critics. This was about something closer, something far more dangerous. Catherine's grip on the letter tightened when she reached the line, "You will know when to open this." The words were underlined, the ink pressed firmly into the paper, as though Diana had wanted to leave no room for doubt. It was clear that Charles had decided now was that moment, and for reasons Catherine could only begin to guess at. There was an unsettling precision in Diana's phrasing. She didn't name the individuals she distrusted, but her descriptions were chilling in their familiarity. Those who wear loyalty as a mask, those who speak of duty while serving themselves. Catherine couldn't ignore the unmistakable implication that the danger wasn't coming from the outside world, but from the very heart of the royal circle. The vagueness was deliberate, leaving just enough room for interpretation, yet heavy enough to spark suspicion about faces Catherine saw every single day. Then came the cryptic phrase that seemed to lock itself into her mind: "Protect the crown from within." It didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a command one passed down from someone who had lived through betrayal, isolation, and the ruthless politics of the palace. Catherine's breath quickened, each inhale sharper than the last. She wasn't merely reading a personal letter. She was absorbing a coded warning, one that hinted at a storm already gathering around her. And then the message shifted. It became personal, direct. Diana began outlining actions, subtle yet significant, that only Catherine could take. These were not the vague hopes of a woman wishing her son's wife well. These were deliberate steps, clearly designed to safeguard both William and the institution he would one day lead. Catherine read on, her hands trembling, the words burning themselves into her memory. There was an almost chilling sense of trust in the way Diana wrote to her, as if she had been chosen long before Catherine had ever married into the family. Each sentence seemed to deepen the gravity of what lay ahead. Catherine could feel her pulse in her fingertips as she turned the page, knowing there was much more hidden in the following lines. And with every word, she began to understand that this was not just about preserving a legacy, but about preventing a betrayal that could shatter the monarchy itself. Yet, what followed in Diana's letter would shift Catherine's world from duty to personal mission and put her directly in the path of royal conflict. Though they never met, Diana and Catherine's lives were forever intertwined by love, by tragedy, and now by a letter meant to bridge the gap of time and loss. From the very beginning of her life with William, Catherine had felt Diana's presence as both a blessing and a shadow. William would often share fragments of his mother's life, the warmth of her laughter, the quiet strength in her eyes, and the way she could make anyone feel seen, even in the coldest of palace halls. Those stories were never told as mere memories. They were warnings, lessons, and reminders of what the crown could give and what it could take away. Catherine had always admired Diana, not for her fame or beauty, but for her compassion and unshakable will in the face of unimaginable pressure. In the public eye, Diana had been radiant, adored, untouchable. Behind the walls of the monarchy, she had been vulnerable, defiant, and heartbreakingly human. Catherine understood the weight of living in that duality, for she, too, now carried the expectations of a nation on her shoulders while navigating the political storms of royal life. And yet, the parallels between them extended beyond their roles. Both women had married into the family not for power, but for love. Both had faced the intense scrutiny of the press, and both had discovered that within the grandeur of royal life lay a labyrinth of unspoken rules and silent battles. There were private moments late at night, when the palace was quiet, when Catherine found herself wishing Diana were still alive, if only to offer her guidance. She longed for someone who understood the unique burden of being both an outsider and a symbol, someone who could tell her how to stand her ground without losing herself. In those moments, she would glance at old photographs of Diana and feel a strange connection, as though they were two women in different eras fighting the same war. Now, with the letter in her hands, that connection was no longer quiet. Imagining it was real. Each line felt like Diana's voice was reaching out across the decades, speaking directly to her. The words were not vague encouragements. They were deliberate, intimate, and urgent. And then came the line that stopped her breath. "You are the one who must carry the light." It was not a suggestion. It was a passing of responsibility, a declaration that Catherine had been chosen, perhaps long before she had even stepped into the public eye. The weight of that sentence settled heavily on her. Carrying the light meant more than maintaining dignity in the spotlight. It meant guarding the integrity of the crown, protecting the ones she loved, and confronting forces within the palace that would prefer she remain silent. It meant accepting a role that was as dangerous as it was sacred. But if Diana saw Catherine as her chosen torchbearer, then someone else in the palace might see her as a threat, and the letter had just painted a target on her back. Buried deep in Diana's words was a veiled warning, not of the press, not of the public, but of a royal adversary much closer to home. It wasn't framed as gossip or speculation. It was written with the quiet certainty of a woman who had lived long enough inside the palace to know exactly where the danger lay. "There will be a woman," the letter read, "who will fight for her place in the shadows of the throne, even if it means destroying those who stand in her way." The sentence was sharp, deliberate, and left no room for misunderstanding. Catherine's heart sank as the truth began to crystallize in her mind. She didn't need a name, she already knew who Diana meant. It wasn't an accusation Catherine could ever voice aloud, but the moment she saw those words, the warmth she had felt reading earlier parts of the letter began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, creeping unease. The warning wasn't about an external threat. It was about someone who lived and breathed within these same walls, someone who smiled in public and whispered in private, shaping events to serve their own ambition. Catherine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly from sorrow to alarm. But in a palace where every movement was noticed, even the smallest flicker did not go unseen. Aides in the corridor would later whisper about how her face had changed after reading the letter, as though she had seen a ghost. The more she considered the words, the more they began to align with recent events. The sudden reshuffling of ceremonial duties, the quiet but deliberate exclusion of certain family members from key meetings, the subtle undermining of her own position, masked as simple oversight. Diana's warning wasn't an abstract prophecy. It was a mirror reflecting the very tensions that had been unfolding around her in recent months. That night, during a private dinner with William, she tried to mask her distraction, but he noticed instantly. He had always been able to read her in ways others could not. His questions were gentle at first. Was she feeling unwell? Had something happened during her meeting with his father? Catherine shook her head, unwilling to break the fragile peace that remained. There was no way she could reveal the full truth yet, not even to him. The danger lay not only in what was written, but in the fact that it had been written at all. If the wrong person learned she had this letter, the consequences could be irreversible. So she made the choice to keep its most damning lines locked away in her mind. Outwardly, she carried on as if nothing had changed, but inside, she was already bracing herself for what she now understood was inevitable. The battle Diana had hinted at was not one she could avoid. It was already here, pressing in on her from all sides. And as Catherine wrestled with the meaning of Diana's warning, Charles revealed the truth about why he had kept the letter hidden all these years. King Charles's voice was unsteady, his eyes distant. This was not a monarch speaking to his daughter-in-law, but a man haunted by his past. He drew in a slow breath before speaking, as if each word carried the weight of decades. He told her that the letter had come into his possession in the days following Diana's passing, quietly delivered by someone who had been entrusted with it long before tragedy struck. It had been sealed, untouched, and its contents were known only to him. Even then, the decision of what to do with it had hung over him like a shadow. He admitted that in those early years, he had considered giving it to William, thinking it might help him understand the complexity of his mother's life. But the more he read and reread its words, the more he realized they weren't meant for her son directly. They carried warnings, accusations, and a kind of raw truth that could have, in his own words, destabilized the family if revealed too soon. Diana's voice on the page was clear, unapologetic, and deeply mistrustful of certain members of the royal household. And while Charles had learned to live with whispers and undercurrents of palace politics, he knew the ripple effect of such words could turn those whispers into open fractures. There was also a more personal reason, one he hesitated to voice. He confessed that part of him had feared what the letter might do to William's view of the institution he was destined to inherit. It wasn't only about protecting the monarchy. It was about protecting his son's faith in it. And yet, the more he considered the timing, the more he realized the letter had been written with a specific reader in mind, and that reader was Catherine. Charles's expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. He admitted that he had worried about what might happen if Catherine saw those words too early in her royal life. The accusations Diana had written, the foresight she had shared, could have placed Catherine in a dangerous position long before she was prepared to defend herself. "You had to grow into the strength she believed you would have," he said quietly, his voice faltering. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, not from a king addressing a subject, but from a man admitting the compromises he had made to keep a fragile balance intact. And now, he explained, the balance had shifted. The institution was at a crossroads, and so was Catherine's place within it. The time for secrecy was over, and the time for understanding had arrived. Handing her the letter was both an act of trust and a surrender of the control he had held for so long. The look in his eyes made it clear he was passing her not just a message, but a responsibility, one that could change everything. But Catherine couldn't ignore what she had read, and her next move would shock even Charles himself. Alone in her quarters, Catherine read the letter again and again, each time feeling the weight of Diana's expectations settle heavier on her shoulders. Every sentence seemed to press deeper into her mind, refusing to let her rest. This was no passing note of affection, no simple keepsake for sentiment's sake. It was a charge, a call to action, written in the ink of urgency. She knew then and there that she could not treat it as a relic to be stored away. It demanded something of her. It demanded everything. The decision formed quickly in her heart. Even if her mind hesitated to catch up, she would honor Diana's words, no matter the cost. This wasn't simply about her own position in the monarchy. It was about safeguarding William, protecting their children, and ensuring that the vision Diana had for the future was not erased by the quiet, calculated hands of those who feared it. Catherine understood now that Diana's warning wasn't a vague prophecy. It was a shield meant for them all, and she had been entrusted to carry it. She began reaching out discreetly to a select few aides who had proven their loyalty through years of service, people whose discretion she could trust beyond question. The conversations were brief, cloaked in the mundane language of daily duties, but each carried layers of meaning beneath the surface. Catherine was testing the waters, verifying the accuracy of certain claims Diana had made, piecing together fragments of palace politics into a clearer, more dangerous picture. Still, the internal conflict gnawed at her. Every vow she had made to uphold the dignity of the crown now seemed to stand in direct tension with the loyalty she felt to Diana's wish. The crown demanded silence, composure, and unity, even in the face of wrongdoing. But Diana's letter urged vigilance, courage, and the readiness to confront betrayal head-on. Catherine could feel the two forces pulling at her in opposite directions, and for the first time since entering royal life, she found herself wondering which vow truly mattered more. And yet, in the quiet hours, when no one was watching, her resolve hardened. She would not confront this enemy head-on, yet. Her power would be in subtlety, in small but deliberate changes within the household, in alliances built quietly in the background. A shift in a schedule here, a reassignment of duties there, nothing so overt it could be traced, yet enough to weaken the influence of those she suspected. Every action would be measured, strategic, and hidden beneath the surface of routine. When she was done reading the letter for the final time that night, she placed it inside the most private keepsake box she owned, one only she knew the location of. It wasn't just for protection. It was symbolic. This letter was no longer a relic from the past. It was the foundation of the path she was about to walk. But as Catherine began quietly moving pieces into place, her every step was being watched, and not by the press. Inside the palace, there are no secrets, only whispers waiting to be overheard. And Catherine's movements had already drawn unwanted attention. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the walls themselves had shifted to watch her more closely. Staff assignments around her were suddenly changed, without explanation. Long-standing aides she trusted were quietly reassigned to distant wings, replaced by unfamiliar faces with polite smiles but unreadable eyes. It was as though a silent hand was rearranging the pieces around her, limiting who she could rely on and who could be trusted to keep her confidence. Soon, the corridors were thick with murmurs. Servants she passed seemed to know more than they should about meetings she had kept deliberately quiet. Conversations she thought were private were somehow finding their way into the broader household. Someone was listening, cataloging, and spreading word, but never in a way that could be traced back to a single source. Catherine began to feel as if she were playing a game where every move was observed, every decision logged. Then came the undeniable signs that she was being monitored. On more than one occasion, she noticed subtle shifts in her schedule. Meetings moved, rooms changed, often without her request. She caught herself wondering whether the adjustments were for convenience or to control who could see her and when. In certain rooms, conversations would be interrupted by unexpected intrusions. Even the guards seemed to appear in new patterns, stationed where she had never seen them before. The intimidation was quiet, but deliberate. A treasured item from her desk went missing, only to reappear days later in a completely different drawer. A small note, unsigned and written in elegant script, was left where she would be certain to find it. It contained no direct threat, only two words: Be careful. It was enough to confirm what she had already suspected. This was not random. Someone wanted her to know she was being watched, to feel the pressure without ever having proof she could confront. William began to notice the change in her demeanor, the guarded look in her eyes, the way she glanced over her shoulder more often. He pressed her to tell him what was wrong, but she couldn't. Not yet. She didn't want to draw him into the web too soon. It was clear now that Diana's letter had already begun setting events into motion, stirring the same forces that had once worked against its writer. The realization was chilling. This wasn't just about reading a warning, she was now living it. Every step she took from here would be shadowed by those who feared what she might uncover or act upon. And while Catherine had resolved to proceed carefully, she knew that the more she moved forward, the more resistance she would face. And then, just when Catherine thought she could manage the fallout, another revelation from the letter emerged, one that could change the monarchy forever. Near the end of the letter, Diana had written something so personal, so raw, that Catherine felt her eyes burn with tears she could no longer hold back. The handwriting seemed to grow steadier here, almost as if Diana herself had paused, gathered her thoughts, and then poured her heart onto the page with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. This was not political. It was not a strategy. It was a mother, speaking across time, desperate to protect her son and the life he would one day lead. The paragraph was addressed directly to William, not in a formal way, but with the intimacy of a mother's voice. Diana spoke of his kindness, his deep sense of duty, and his tendency to shoulder the burdens of others without complaint. But in the same breath, she warned of the dangers of that very loyalty. She urged Catherine to shield him from the same heartbreak I endured, words that struck Catherine like a blow. She knew exactly what Diana meant: the isolation, the betrayal, the relentless pressure that had nearly broken her. Catherine's mind raced, replaying moments in which William had been forced to hide his own pain for the sake of the family's image. Then came a line that lingered in Catherine's mind like an echo. The crown is better worn by love than by entitlement. It was simple, yet it carried the weight of an entire philosophy. This wasn't just about who sat on the throne, it was about how they wielded it. Diana was warning against the cold grip of tradition for tradition's sake, urging a future where compassion mattered more than power. Catherine could feel the weight of that vision, pressing against the centuries-old walls of the monarchy itself. The implication was clear. Catherine wasn't just being asked to protect William as a husband and father. She was being called to fight for a different kind of monarchy, one built not on the fear of losing control, but on the willingness to serve with empathy and humanity. The message was revolutionary in its simplicity, and Catherine knew that if those words ever became public, they could divide the family in ways that might never be mended. Her hands trembled as she read the paragraph aloud to herself, her voice breaking by the final sentence. The emotions she had managed to contain throughout the rest of the letter came crashing down all at once. She felt as if Diana had entrusted her with a living flame, fragile, yet powerful enough to change everything if handled with courage. And in that moment, Catherine understood that the letter was not just a farewell or a fragment of the past. It was a mission, deliberately placed in her hands for a reason. She folded the pages slowly, almost reverently, knowing she could never see them the same way again. The tears that streaked her face were not just for the woman who had written them, but for the battle they now demanded she fight. And as Catherine wiped her tears, she knew the path ahead would demand every ounce of her courage, because Diana's prophecy was only beginning to unfold. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.